Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you for joining us for this conversation and webinar on organ transplant issues in Islam, global organ trafficking, and exploitation of the Uighur Muslims, inshallah. Before we get started, we would like to start with a recitation of the Quran. So we will cut to that right now.
هو الذي خلقكم من تراب ثم من نطفة ثم من علقة ثم يخرجكم طفلا ثم لتبلغوا أشدكم ثم لتكونوا شيوخا ومنكم من يتوفى من قبل ولتبلغوا أجلا مسمى ولعلكم تعقلون هو الذي يحيي ويميت فإذا قضى أمرا فإنما يقول له كن فيكون.
Okay, Jazakallah for that recitation there. We will also get started with a brief video about the Nagamia Institute of Islamic Medicine and Sciences.
Nagamia Institute of Islamic Medicine and Sciences, formerly known as the International Institute of Islamic Medicine, aims to bring alive discoveries and inventions in medicine and other sciences. Through exhibitions, storytelling, and modern technology. We are a network of academics, historians, scientists, and physicians with deep subject matter expertise. We are eager to share our knowledge to create experiences that produce a better understanding of the Islamic ethos and the contributions of Muslims to medicine and other sciences. We invite you to join us to promote a scientific mindset and to inspire excellence in generations to come.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. So we are bringing this to you on behalf of the NIMS, Nagamia Institute of Islamic Medical Sciences, and the Hayat Medical Relief Foundation. Very sadly, Dr. Nagamia passed away almost 1 week ago, and this topic and this Uighur situation, as well as transplant medicine, was discussed with him before we had announced that this was going to be a webinar, and he was very excited to bring this to the Muslim community and the broader community, because this is about a human rights issue. So I really miss him today, and inshallah we keep him in our du'as. Dr. Tajuddin Ahmed will speak a little bit more about that today. It's a very relevant conversation, as we're seeing Islamophobia globally is pushing newer and newer places, from Palestine, Kashmir, China, and this week was Canada. So we have to be educated about what's going on throughout the world. Every movement starts with knowledge, whether it's BLM, anti-apartheid movement. We must gain knowledge before we take action. So I'm very appreciative of our speakers here today, and it's very timely that we get this information before we start organizing, motivating each other, and collaborating to bring a change. I'd like to introduce Dr. Tajuddin Ahmed, who's one of the founding members of Imana in Columbus, Ohio. He first joined NIMS as a member and treasurer of both NIMS and IIM. He's a president of Imana, one of the founding members of ISNA from its inception, founding member and president of MVIA, as well as the co-founder and president of the Taj Foundation, a nonprofit educational foundation. Without further ado, Dr. Tajuddin Ahmed.
Assalamu alaikum. It's indeed a pleasure to welcome you all today webinar in the midst of sadness because of Dr. Nagamia's departure a week ago on Friday, and I happened to be there in the hospital a few days before he died, on the day of his death, and his viewing time, janaza time, and ultimately burial. I was amazed to see people who are Muslims and non-Muslims coming to his funeral, Hindus, Christians, Jews, dignitaries, past and present mayor of Tampa, and a police chief, besides the entire medical fraternity from Tampa. The mosque was, a huge mosque, was completely full of all the people who came to pay respect to him. He was my personal buddy and a friend since early 70s. We were both involved in all the organizations together. We used to be on the same page in terms of functioning with different organizations and contributing whatever we could do to the Muslim Ummah at large. I would say he was just not an individual. He was an institution by himself. Belonged to a very illustrious, educated family from India. And his contributions are too many to enumerate. He was involved with ISNA, Imana, AFMI, many educational projects of his own in Gujarat, a very famous, very relevant charity festival in Tampa, Florida, every year for last 25 years. In this sadness, I thank all the executives and NIMS to make sure that we carry his not only the name and the legacy and bring it to a very high level. This is up to the next generation to build on this physical facility that we have created in Rolling Meadows. Personally thankful to Alia, who has been a core member in the development of NIMS we have. So we will continue our webinars in future. Shahab already mentioned the topic today. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. Please enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Tajuddin Ahmed. And, anybody who's watching this, NIMS and Hayat Relief, I would say one thing about NIMS that I've noticed is they're very open for people wanting to be involved and getting involved. So reach out to Sister Alia. She's the executive director. I've been working with her in NIMS for the past year. And mashallah, she's very open. She gives you kind of give some background about all the events going down. So please follow NIMS on Facebook for more updates. Also, Hayat Relief, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We've been doing some projects in different parts of the world. I think also there's a lot of intersectionality with this conversation that's about to happen. The reason we're bringing it through NIMS and also through Hayat Relief is that there's a good deal of medical information about this transplant organ harvesting that the medical field has brought together. Now we also need activists who are also going to take this information to the right places and make it common knowledge so action can come. So what we can do is right now we actually have Sister Surwi Hussein. She's from the Save Uyghur campaign, team lead for Justice for All. She's an educator and Uyghur activist. Surwi is also a renowned writer, translator, and poetess. She was born and raised in East Turkestan and graduated from Xinjiang University in 2000. Surwi holds a Master of Education degree from Fried Hardeman University, and her thesis was on preserving Uyghur language in the Uyghur diaspora. So for right now, she is going to give us some of her thoughts on what is going on. Okay, so I think her microphone was on mute. Let me just alert her to that. Okay. Did you take it off of mute?
I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem, no problem. Okay, we'll start that again. So please start from the beginning.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for watching our program, which addresses the issue of forced organ harvesting committed by Chinese Communist Party on Uyghurs and other ethnic Turkic-speaking nations who live in East Turkestan. I am an ethnic Uyghur. I was born and raised in East Turkestan. I grew up hearing about the horrific stories about how Chinese Communist Party had illegally detained the family members of Uyghurs and how the enforced disappearances are happening around me. But the situation in East Turkestan escalated since 2016. Right now, it's not a mystery anymore for anyone who is focusing on the human rights issue that up to 5 million of Uyghurs and other ethnic Turkic-speaking nations such as Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Uzbek, and Tatars have been locked up in the massive network of the detention centers of Communist Party of China in various locations of East Turkestan. As any other Uyghur who live in diaspora, I have family members who have been illegally locked up for lame reasons into the detention centers and sentenced with long time imprisonment. First time, when I heard that my brother-in-law, who was a practitioner dentist at that time, and my nephew, my older sister's son, when he was taken by CCP, and the first thing came to my mind, that the question, the fear is whether Communist Party of... This is my own... I'm sorry for the interruption. The first thing came to my mind is that whether they will be enforced disappeared by the Communist Party of China, whether their organs will be harvested, like a lot of just the stories that I grew up hearing about. So, and also when 2019, after my long time of silence, when my family members were disappeared forcibly by Communist Party of China, when I collaborated with journalists and I made these enforced disappearance public, one of my friends called me and they said, Sarvi, you did the right decision. Now, Chinese Communist Party, at least maybe they will not be in such a hurry to disappear your relatives, or maybe their organs won't be harvested by Communist Party of China, because right now they know that you are searching for your family members. So China has a long history of organ harvesting. Right now, a lot of data shows that even though in 2014, after with the global pressure of stop organ harvesting in China, China promised to the world in 2014 that they're going to stop the forced organ harvesting, and then their organ transfer operations will be done with the organs donated by the volunteers only. And then in 2015, they declared to the world that they are on track, and that they are using only the donor or organs in the organ transfer operations. But data released on the news is revealing that China is actually lying to the whole world. 1 or 2 hospitals in China right now, annually, they perform up to 6,000 liver transfer. And this is equal to liver transfer operations done in USA by the entire USA hospitals in a year. So when we do the comparison, the data is really scary. And also the messages, the information that leaked through by the Chinese state propaganda, or Chinese, the research projects that has been done by the Chinese universities and facilities, and the research done in the Western world, it shows that actually China can make a revenue, can make a benefit up to $1 billion annually by forced organ harvesting. So now it comes to my question that now my family members are in detention, and data is so scary, and the facts are so scary that China is forcibly harvesting organs from the detention centers, from the detainees in the detention centers, and also from their own prisons, from the detainees who are the victims of the conscience. They are doing it. What is the world's reaction? Now I would like to talk about like what has U.S. done to stop China to force organ harvesting. So last December, as an Uyghur activist, I was so happy when I heard the news that a new bill was introduced in the Congress in last December, in 2020. The name of the bill is Stop Organ Harvesting Act. Stop Organ Harvesting of China Act. The main purpose of this bill is to stop China to conduct forced organ harvesting from the victims of conscience and from the ethnic minorities, from the ethnic minority and also minority religious groups in East Turkestan and other various parts of China. So also this bill aims to hold accountable the top Chinese officials who are responsible for such forced organ harvesting crime. While I was happy, the things that came to my mind when I heard this good news is that, so when the bill was introduced, and then while legislation is on process, and then but every single day in the detention centers, my nephew, my brother-in-law, and other fellow Uyghurs, they are in the risk of forced organ harvesting every day. They are at the risk of forced disappearance every day. So what came to my mind is all these actions has been done. U.S. is not enough. While I'm considering that the action has been taken by USA, the country that I reside in is not enough. The other things came to my mind: what the other Muslim majority countries' reaction for this organ harvesting issue. So it's like it's really, the fact is really saddening. Instead of showing solidarity for the Uyghurs who are at risk of such a horrific crime of the Chinese government, instead of showing the solidarity for their for this group of people who share the same belief with them, the leaders of the Muslim majority countries, they are standing by the side of China because of their economic and political diplomatic relationship, because of their own benefit, because of their own profit. And also on their media channels, they are propagating that actually the Uyghur genocide issue, the forced organ harvesting, the risk and the arbitrary torture and enforced disappearance, forced sterilization, and so on and so forth. All these risks stated by the Western media is actually not true. And that they are the Western propaganda. And that they are propagating like this to their own people. So on social media, when I shared my family story, when I share the news articles, that some of our Muslim brothers and sisters will drop a message and they say, oh, this is actually true. You have active family members who are in detention. Oh, this is true. The camp survivor is talking like this. So our government propaganda is a lie. At that time, just when I see such kind of messages, like I just shake my head in disbelief. And our dear Muslim brothers and sisters, there are certain portion of people who are still in disbelief about this ongoing genocide. Right now, the U.S. State Department, I cannot pronounce, like Netherlands and Canada and another small country, and they have already declared that what China's treatment to Uyghurs is ongoing genocide. And in 2019, in China tribunal held in London, it was already declared that it's well beyond doubt that China is indeed persecuting Uyghurs and locking up Uyghurs in the detention centers. And also, they are forcibly harvesting organs of these detainees inside the concentration camps. So such declarations has taken place, and the genocide declaration has taken place. And several days ago, and we watched the Uyghur tribunal, which was held in London, and we heard about the testimonies of the camp survivors. Every camp survivors, they unanimously said that inside these concentration camps, the Chinese doctors, they do periodically medical checkup. In some occasions, they even do forced organ scanning inside the camps. And then they periodically draw blood samples from the detainees. Every one of them said, for example, the Umar Bakali, who is residing in Netherlands, and who was a Kazakhstan citizen, but detained illegally, identified as an Uyghur in East Turkestan, and he provided his testimony, like every 3 months, they drew blood sample from him while he stayed in one of the detention centers in East Turkestan. And upon his admission, one big whole body checkup. And after 3 months, while they were transferring him to another detention facility, another whole body checkup. They did take his blood samples, urine samples. They did a whole physical body checkup. And Tursunay Ziaudan, while she was describing about torture and the sexual abuse which was taken on her inside the concentration camp, she also addressed that they actually drew a blood sample from her. And Zumrat Daud, another camp survivor who is right now residing in USA, and while we were interviewing her, and she said that there was a small window on the door, and then the detainees had to hand out their hands, and then they drew blood samples from the detainees, and they even cannot be able to see how much blood was drawn from them. So all these evidences of the
Okay. All right. Sister Sirwi, you can wrap up shortly. We're gonna address more of this in the question answer session, inshallah. I wanted to move on to our next speaker. Thank you so much for that alarming eyewitness testimony. To actually hear someone who has family members in that region who've been affected deeply impacts my perception of it. Being able to see someone who's actually Uyghur and knows firsthand what it's like is very tough to digest. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Dr. Ali Iqbal. He's a Canadian transplant nephrologist practicing in Hamilton, Ontario. He's an assistant professor of medicine at McMaster University, where he completed his medical school and residency training. He is interested in medical education with a focus on residency and fellowship education. He is also interested in transplant bioethics, organ trafficking, and is a member of the Canadian Committee of the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China. Without further ado, Dr. Ali Iqbal.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Thanks, Shahab, for the introduction, and thank you, Sister Sarwi, for that powerful testimony of your personal, experiences and encounters with this horrific problem of forced organ harvesting. So I'm just going to share my slides. Okay. So I just want to thank NIMS for putting this event together, and hopefully it'll be a useful lecture. And here's an outline of what I plan to discuss, and hopefully these topics are of interest to our audience. So I'll just start by giving a medical background on organ transplant. Then we'll get into the global organ trafficking industry, and then we'll focus on the medical ethical principles that pertain to organ transplantation. And then a topic that always stirs up a lot of discussion and questions is what's the Islamic perspective and the fiqh around organ transplantation. So I'll get into that. And then we'll conclude by speaking specifically about the issue of forced organ harvesting in China. So a bit of background on organ transplant, and obviously I'm biased here because I'm a transplant doctor, but I think organ transplant is really one of the greatest achievements in modern medicine. You know, it allows people with end-stage organ disease, liver disease, kidney disease to really continue to live and be productive members of society. And according to some Canadian data, there were about 3,000 organ transplants done in Canada, most of which were kidney transplants, followed by liver, lung, and heart transplants. According to the WHO, 91 countries perform organ transplants. Again, 66,000 were kidney transplants, followed by liver transplants, and then 6,000 heart transplants were performed every year. So I'm a nephrologist, so I'll speak specifically about kidney transplantation. So end-stage renal disease is very common, and it's increasing in its prevalence. And the most common causes of end-stage kidney disease are diabetes, hypertension, genetic syndromes like polycystic kidney disease, and certain autoimmune conditions. Once people get to the stage of end-stage renal disease, they really require some sort of kidney replacement therapy to live. And that could come either in the form of dialysis, which can take several forms in itself, or renal transplantation. And on the bottom, you can see some pictures of some patients on dialysis. The bottom left, this gentleman is receiving hemodialysis, where the blood is removed from the circulation and run through a hemodialysis machine, and excess fluid and toxins are removed from the circulation and returned into his bloodstream. And the most typical form of hemodialysis, people have to go to the hospital 3 to 4 times per week, usually for 3 to 4 hours per session, to receive these treatments. The gentleman in the middle is receiving peritoneal dialysis, where a tube is inserted into the patient's belly, into his peritoneum, and fluid is instilled in the belly and is exchanged with, excess toxins and fluids are removed through that fluid. And usually people undergo peritoneal dialysis every night, and this is a therapy that's done at home. And then finally, renal transplantation in the bottom right. This is where a kidney transplant, a kidney comes from a donor, either a deceased donor or a living donor, and it's transplanted onto the recipient's iliac artery and iliac vein. And essentially it's connected to the bladder, and then it replaces the function of the deceased kidneys. And one common question is, do we leave the diseased kidneys in there? And yes, we do. 99% of the time, the native kidneys remain in the recipient's body unless there's a reason to remove them, like renal cell carcinoma or some type of cancer or infection. So, dialysis is an option for people with end-stage renal disease, but it's really not a great option because it limits people's quality of life, their freedom, and more importantly, their life expectancy. So just to give you an idea, on outcomes at 5 years, less than 50% of dialysis patients are still alive. The projected life expectancy for people on dialysis is about 5.8 years, compared to people who get a kidney transplant is about 17.2 years. So really, kidney transplant improves life expectancy, it improves quality of life, and also to add to that, it's less expensive for the healthcare system. In Canada, each dialysis patient costs the healthcare system about $65,000 per year, whereas kidney transplant patients are usually about $20,000 to $25,000 per year. So it's more economic for our healthcare system, and really it's better for patients. So there's different types of organ transplants. So in terms of the different organs that we do solid organ transplants for, there's heart transplant, lung transplant, kidney, liver, pancreas, or intestinal transplants. And then in terms of the different types of transplant, there's living donor and deceased donor. And living donor transplant usually comes from a friend or a family member, or sometimes what we call an altruistic donor, which is just someone that wants to do something nice for someone that needs an organ transplant and just donates to a random person. Unfortunately, living donors can also come through organ trafficking, where people are paid to donate their organs, and we'll get into that as well. And the organs that can be donated by a living donor are kidney transplants, liver transplants, and sometimes even partial lung transplants can come from a living donor. And then deceased donor transplant, there's two main types of deceased donor transplant. There's DCD, which is donation after circulatory death, and there's NDD, which is neurologic determination of death, or the other term for that is brain dead donor. And it's really important to understand the distinction between DCD and NDD. So NDD means that the donor, usually the donor is in an ICU setting, they have some sort of catastrophic injury or illness, and they're declared as brain dead. And there's two different ICU physicians that have declared this person as brain dead, and then they become a candidate for NDD donation as long as they or their family have consented for organ donation. And then the organs are retrieved while the heart is still beating. So the heart is still beating, this person is completely brain dead, they have no brain activity, and the organs are retrieved from that particular donor. With DCD, what that means is that this person is not technically brain dead, but they have some sort of catastrophic illness or injury that they will not recover from. The ICU team and the patient's family make the decision that, we're just prolonging this patient's suffering and they will not recover from this. So the decision is made to withdraw life support. And only when that person's heart stops, they wait an additional 5 to 10 minutes, and then they go in and retrieve the organs. So that's the difference between DCD and NDD. So let's talk a little bit about organ trafficking. So, the shortage of organs is really a universal problem. In Canada, about 1,800 renal transplants were performed in 2019, while there are 3,300 people on the waiting list, and there were 5,800 new dialysis patients. So really, the patients that are experiencing end-stage renal disease are outpacing the number of kidney transplants that we're performing each year. And the number of patients with ESRD is increasing. So from 2010 to 2019, over that period, there's a 33% increase in ESRD patients. And the wait time for a deceased donor can be up to 6 years. And it's also important to know that many countries don't even have a deceased donor program. And and unfortunately, this is common in our Muslim countries because of religious misconceptions or social issues or cultural issues. There's really no deceased donor program, so people are forced. If they don't have a family member that can donate to them, oftentimes they feel that they're forced to go to other countries to purchase organs, and we'll get into that as well. So just to summarize, there's been a growing demand for organs because of an aging population, increase in these comorbidities like hypertension, diabetes, and also where more patients are becoming eligible for transplant because we are transplanting older people and more comorbid people. So there's an increased demand for transplant for all these reasons. And unfortunately, the supply hasn't kept up because there's been an increase in deceased donor rates, but really there hasn't been an increase significantly in living donor rates in the last 10 years. So this supply-demand mismatch is really what's fueling this organ transplant industry. And WHO estimates that about 10% of organ transplants occur through organ trafficking. And obviously there's many ethical concerns with organ trafficking because we don't really know the circumstances under which the donor donated their organs, whether this person was paid, whether, like in China, whether these were executed prisoners, the ethical issues of, only people that can afford to pay for an organ are able to advance and improve their health. The follow-up of the donors and the health of the donors is really not a concern in organ trafficking, and that's a big issue as well. And also there's public health concerns with drug-resistant organisms that are being brought back to their home countries. And transplant tourism and organ trafficking, they're deemed illegal in most countries and condemned by all international medical societies. This diagram is from a study which was published in the American Journal of Transplantation, looking at people in the US that went abroad for kidney transplants. And it's just showing the different countries that they went to receive their organ trafficked kidneys. And the most common country was China, followed by Philippines, and then India, Pakistan, and a few other countries you can see in this map. This table is showing various websites that patients can go to on the internet to essentially arrange for a trafficked organ. And you can see various prices are listed here. Like in China, you can get a kidney transplant for $70,000, a liver transplant for 120 US. And there's prices listed in Pakistan and Philippines. So this is just to show you what's out there. So in 2004, the World Health Organization, they addressed this issue of organ trafficking, and they called on all the member countries and all international medical organizations to really make a statement and declare the ethical considerations for organ transplantation. And this is where the Declaration of Istanbul came from. And the principles of the DOI is that the optimal care of donors and recipients should be the primary goal in organ transplantation, and trafficking of human organs should be prohibited and criminalized, and organ donation should be a financially neutral act. Countries should implement legislation governing recovery of organs, and ultimately countries should strive to achieve self-sufficiency in transplantation so that this need for organ trafficking is no longer required, because countries have their own deceased donor programs that can serve their communities. So I'll talk a little bit about the outcomes of people that quote unquote donate their kidneys into organ trafficking, and donate is in quotations because when you think about donating something, it's usually an altruistic act that's done out of goodwill. But a lot of times these donors are really trying to sell their kidneys because they're in a tough financial situation, or these kidneys or organs are forcefully taken from them, like in China. So this is a study from Pakistan that looks at people that sold their kidneys into organ trafficking. And I just want to point out a few things here, that about 90% of these people were illiterate. So really, these were very uneducated and financially destitute, underprivileged people. And 66% of these people were bonded labor workers, which is kind of a modern form of slavery almost, in that these people are working labor jobs to repay debts that may have been from their grandfathers or great-grandfathers. So really just to show the kind of people that are donating into organ trafficking. And the deception that's used to kind of exploit these people and make them force or donate their organs is really concerning. you can see here that about 65% of people were promised to receive about $2,000 for their kidney, and only 35% actually received the amount that they were promised. What about their health after they donate their kidney? So 62% reported that their health was really weak after they donated their kidney, and about 85% reported no improvement in their economic situation after selling their kidney into organ transplant. So what about their health outcomes? So again, this was the same group in Pakistan that matched people that actually sold their kidneys into organ trafficking to people that actually donated to living related recipients. So the people that sold their kidneys into organ trafficking, they had more hypertension, they had lower EGFR, they had more proteinuria, and they had higher rates of Hep B and Hep C. And I think there's a couple of reasons for their poorer health outcomes. Number one, lack of follow-up. So these people that donate into organ trafficking, they don't get proper follow-up as we would for people that are donating into, ethical and organized organ transplant programs. And secondly, the screening of these patients is not nearly as robust as people that are donating into organ transplant programs, because really this is financially motivated, so they don't really care about the health outcomes of the donors after they donate their kidneys. What about the recipient side of things? So this is a study published out of Toronto, which was looking at 20 people that received a kidney through organ trafficking. About 50%, so more than half of patients were medically unstable and had to be admitted to hospital on their first clinic visit. More than 1/3 had pyelonephritis, many of which from multi-drug resistant organisms. 14% had active TB, 20% had significant fungal infections. And then the hazard ratio for death-censored graft failure, so this is the chance that the kidney will fail, was 2.5 times higher at 3 years. And then the follow-up study in 2016 showed that even higher risk of death-censored graft failure at 3.7 at 8 years. So the next section, I just want to talk about organ transplantation in Islam, and just want to disclose that I'm not an imam, or I don't have any formal training in fiqh or anything like that. Like many of you, I'm a Muslim physician and I practice transplant medicine, so this is an area that's of interest to me. So this is just based on my reading and my understanding of the various fatwas that have been issued on this concept of organ transplant. A bit of background of organ transplant in Muslim communities. So a study from Toronto showed that South Asian Muslim Canadians were 50% less likely to receive a living donor kidney transplant. These people were much less likely to register as deceased organ donors. And as we know, there's higher rates of diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, and kidney disease in our communities. And many Muslim countries, as I mentioned before, don't have a deceased donor program at all. And that caused a lot of people to look elsewhere to purchase kidneys through transplant tourism. And kind of one question to ask yourself is that, God forbid, if me or a family member needed an organ transplant, would we accept one? And if the answer to that question is yes, then we should ask, why would we not then donate to organ transplant as well? And there's a lot of misconceptions kind of floating around in the Muslim South Asian community about organ transplant, and it's kind of one of two extremes. One of them is that Islam completely prohibits organ transplant, that's completely haram, and we shouldn't even consider it. And that's one misconception. And I think the other misconception is on the other extreme, that Islam unequivocally endorses organ transplant and organ donation. And really the truth is somewhere in the middle. And most fiqh councils suggest that organ transplant is permissible in principle, provided that certain conditions are met. And in Surah number 5, one of the verses that's often used to justify or to support organ transplant is that whoever saves a life, it is as if they saved all of humanity. So this is the overriding principle that's used in a lot of these fiqh discussions of relating to organ transplant. And I've listed here a lot of the national and international fiqh councils and muftis that have supported organ transplant. And just to name a few, the Islamic Fiqh Academy of OIC, the Muslim World League, the Grand Mufti of Egypt, the Senior Scholars of Saudi Arabia, the Fatwa Council of Malaysia, Islamic Religious Council of Singapore, and a Mufti out of the UK as well, published a over 100-page fatwa on organ transplant as well. And many of these fatwas say that if done with good intention, organ donation may even be regarded as a rewarded act of sadaqah jariyah or charity. So what are the conditions of organ transplant in Islam? Number one, the donor isn't harmed by the organ donation, and vital organs are only donated after the patient has died. And the definition of death in Islam is something that is there is a difference of opinion here, and I'll get into that in the next slide, specifically when relating to brain death. The second condition is that the recipient requires the organ in order to live and perform an essential function. The donor's body, living or dead, is respected and treated with dignity. The donor gives organs freely, and there's no deception or financial transaction. And there's no donation of reproductive organs. And again, organs are not bought or sold. So one question that, as I mentioned, is very debated and comes up a lot in organ transplant discussions is brain death considered death in Islam? So it's a challenging question to answer because in Islam, we think of death as the soul leaving our physical body. So this is a metaphysical reality. And the question is, how does that really correspond to biological, observable, physical signs? So various fiqh councils and muftis have weighed in on this question. In 1982, the senior scholars of Saudi Arabia said that organs can be removed after irreversible circulatory death or neurological death has been confirmed. So they confirmed that neurological death or brain death meets criteria for death. The Islamic Fiqh Council of the OIC also concluded that neurological death is an acceptable form of death and organs can be retrieved after brain death. And more recently, the Fiqh Council of North America, they had the other opinion that there's not enough information to conclude that brain death does meet the definition of death and does not allow for organ retrieval for patients that are brain dead. The Fiqh Council of North America says that life support has to be withdrawn and the heart has to stop before organ donation takes place. One thing that's pretty unanimous among the different fatwa that's come out in support of organ transplant is that there's a complete prohibition of buying and selling organs. And this is based on three Islamic concepts: trust, dignity, and blocking the means of evil. So the first kind of principle is that the human body is a trust that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows upon the human soul. And based on this, humans are not allowed to kill themselves. And by extension, they can't sell what's not their own. Human dignity applies that organs are not commodities that can be bought or sold. And organ trafficking is an objectionable reality. And we as Muslims should block the means of these crimes being committed. So finally, I just want to move on to the last part of the presentation, which is talking about forced organ harvesting in China. And again, I really appreciate Survi giving us that personal stories related to this. And I'll focus more on kind of the medical literature that's existing about forced organ harvesting and the evidence that's out there. So China is the second largest transplant program in the world. In 1984, China passed legislation to allow organs from executed prisoners. And of course, this in and of itself has pretty significant ethical concerns, like can someone that's on death row really consent to donating their organs? Are these lawful executions? Are we timing these executions to meet the needs of the recipients, which is also, super problematic ethically? And this practice was, of course, condemned by various organizations like Helsinki, Amnesty International, World Medical Associations. And it's important to note that China historically has always had very low rates of voluntary organ donation. But in the early 2000s, the number of transplants really started to explode exponentially in China, which started to raise questions about where these organs are coming from. And they started interviewing some Chinese surgeons, and they found that forced organ harvesting had been occurring for years from prisoners of conscience, specifically Uyghur prisoners, since the 1990s. And in the early 2000s, Falun Gong became the primary source of organs, along with other minority groups like Tibetans or Christian groups. And after many, many years of denial, the Chinese health minister in 2005, they confirmed that, yes, we have been using executed prisoners for transplants since the 80s. And not only have we been using them, this has been the primary source of our organ transplants, and up to 95% were from executed prisoners. But what they always denied was that these prisoners were actually prisoners of conscience and not people that actually committed grave crimes against society, like murderers or rapists or things like that. These are actually prisoners of conscience. So who are the Uyghurs? As most of us know, they're a Turkic ethnic group, majority Muslim, native to northwest China. And since 2015, millions have been detained in detention camps to suppress their religion, their culture, and to enforce upon them Chinese ideology. And we've all seen reports of torture, forced labor, mass sterilization, surveillance, rape, and forced organ harvesting in these camps. And many, many groups have declared this a genocide, including the Canadian Parliament and the US government. And who are the Falun Gong practitioners? So the Falun Gong, this was a spiritual discipline involving meditation and some philosophical roots in the Buddhist tradition. And it started increasing in popularity in the 1990s. And by 1998, there were over 70 million Falun Gong practitioners. The Chinese government did not like this because they thought this would be a threat to their national ideology. So they, in the late 90s, started detaining these people and forcing them into re-education camps, similar to what's happening to the Uyghurs today. And again, evidence of widespread torture, forced labor, and forced organ harvesting was being committed on the Falun Gong people. So these reports of forced organ harvesting really started with the Kilgore-Matus report in 2006, which was then revised in 2007. And these were two international human rights lawyers that were eventually nominated for a Nobel Prize for their work. And they were the first ones to really shed light on this issue and systematically review the evidence. And this was followed by a book in 2012 by David Matus and Torsten Trey. And there's many other investigations by Ethan Gutman, a documentary called Human Harvest, Hard to Believe. And then finally, kind of the culmination of all this was the China Tribunal, which occurred in June 2019, and the final judgment was delivered on March 2020. So the China Tribunal was an independent tribunal in China of forced organ harvesting in China, which was based out of London, UK, and it was chaired by Sir Geoffrey Nice, who was the lead prosecutor in the Bosnian genocide as well. And the tribunal's members concluded beyond reasonable doubt that in China, forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience has been practiced for a substantial period of time, involving a very substantial number of victims. They also concluded that crimes against humanity have been committed against Falun Gong and Uyghurs, which is also beyond reasonable doubt. So there's been multiple lines of evidence that have pointed towards forced organ harvesting. Number one, just the massive growth in transplants from 2000s onward with the discrepancy in organ source. Extremely, extremely short wait times for deceased donor organs, like 1 month for a liver transplant, 1 to 2 week kidney transplants. And also, you can get an on-demand heart transplant, which really isn't possible, because if someone needs a heart transplant, they need to go on a waiting list and wait a period of time until a compatible donor passes away, and then they get a heart transplant. But you can't schedule a heart transplant in advance, and that's clearly what's happening in China. Also, the vulnerability of imprisoned groups like the Uyghurs and the Falun Gong. As Sirwi was mentioning, the medical testing in custody, they say that we're performing these routine health checks on these people, but really what they're doing is doing medical testing to see their suitability for transplant. Recorded phone calls to hospitals confirming the use of Falun Gong prisoner organs, lots of testimony from ex-prisoners and surgeons, as well as significant commercial incentives for China. When this came to light, obviously there was significant condemnation by the international medical community. The Transplantation Society, the Lancet, all put out statements condemning this activity. And AJT, the American Journal of Transplant, in 2011 said, if the medical community does not do their utmost to end this practice, we will all have blood on our hands. So in response to all this international pressure, China, they allegedly started making some transplant reform in their country, and they established what they called was the Chinese Organ Transplant Registry, COTRS, which was supposed to be a public registry of organ transplants. And they said that from 2010 to 2018, the quote-unquote voluntary number of deceased donors increased by 185 times for kidneys and 166 times for livers. And these changes were initially applauded by the international community, but then some skepticism started to come about because there was still very little transparency in the transplant data, because the data sets weren't publicly available. They required manual requests from official Chinese sources and state-run publications. And this was a really groundbreaking paper that was published in BMC in 2019. And I won't go into too much detail, but it really examined the availability, transparency, integrity of the transplant data and used mathematical modeling to see whether this data was actually reliable or not. And the conclusions from this paper was that there was contradictory, implausible, and anomalous data artifacts found in all the provincial data sets. And the only plausible explanation is that there's systematic falsification and manipulation of these official organ transplant data sets. And the last paper I just want to present to you was published in 2020. And there was some really concerning data about the age of the donors that were the age of these deceased donors in China. So in one paper, the mean age of deceased cardiac DCD donors was 39 years, and brain dead donors was 35 years in China. Which is really a discrepancy compared to other countries. In Canada, the mean age of DCD donors is 53, and the warm ischemic time, which is the time it takes from withdrawal of life support to organ retrieval, in this Chinese paper was 5 minutes. And that's not possible, because really you have to wait for the person to pass away, then the surgeons have to go in and retrieve the organ, so it's not possible for this whole process to take 5 minutes. And in Canada, most DCD donors have a warm ischemic time of greater than 30 minutes. And the question is, how is this possible with the natural deaths? And the answer is simple. This is through forced organ harvesting. And finally, what's going on today in China? And it seems like it's just business as usual. There's been millions of Uyghurs that have been detained in these detention camps, ongoing reports of torture, forced organ harvesting, and forced labor. And millions of Uyghurs have been forced to undergo medical testing and tissue typing. And as I've presented, the falsified donor data with increasing transplant rates suggests that this practice continues. Finally, what can we do about it? I think the first step to any change is knowledge, and we need to learn about this issue and spread awareness. There's a 7-minute video that's been produced by ETAC, or End Transplant Abuse in China, which we'll share on the Facebook page, so you can share that on your social media to spread awareness on this issue. As medical professionals, we need to educate our patients and deter them from transplant tourism. And we need to push our governments to strengthen laws, like the US is passing that law that Surrey mentioned, and Canada is also looking at a law against organ trafficking as well. And we need to support organizations like ETAC and Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting that are working on this issue. And we need to urge our professional societies and institutions to condemn this practice and develop policies against it. And with that, I will conclude. I'm sorry I went over time, and I'll hand things back to the moderator.
Oh wow, so much data compiled. Jazakallah for doing this, for having this repository of actual data. This is how change happens, by looking at these anomalies and transplants. Will help us fight for our Uyghur brother and sisters more effectively, inshallah. Um, I think from what I put from here, getting a harvested kidney is bad for the person who's donating it and from the recipient, just looking at the outcomes from your data. So at least within our community, because I think we had a conversation before where you might be able to elaborate on this, that one of the biggest markets for organ transplants is the Gulf region and parts of the Middle East. They say they're halal organs. I think somebody was asking me, what are the halal organs being um, advertised, and is it true that the Middle East, parts of the Gulf, are getting some of these organs?
So there's definitely allegations of that, and there's definitely reports of that. I didn't want to share that particularly in my slides because there hasn't been solid, medical evidence to conclude that. But that's definitely something that ETAC and transplant abuse in China is actively investigating, but they haven't come up with solid evidence to confirm that as of yet.
Okay, good to know that, because I think that was in some blurbs and headlines. So, but that's good to know there has not been that. But I think it's something we can all be aware of. Another question we got was for Sister Surwi. If you wanted to land and go to see your family, would that be possible at this point? And what are the communication issues with trying to get a hold of your family if you wanted to know what was going on?
Yeah, I do miss my family members back home. It has been 10 years for me not to see them. And my communication was cut off in 2016. And then, that even when my mom passed away, I learned the news so late. So if you ask me, you want to go? I say yes, wholeheartedly. I want to visit. But it is impossible for me to make the decision to go to East Turkestan. Because number one, maybe I'm listed as one of the like suspicious family member in abroad, and then Chinese embassy might not issue a visa for me. This is number one. And another is, like, we have heard from our friends who live in Houston that in early 2016 and 17, and they went to visit their family members, and because they don't go to protest, they're not outspoken about the Uyghur issue, and then I think they are the very safe candidates to visit their family members, despite the stories that a concentration camp was under progress and family members were detained. They went, one of our family friend actually who live in Houston, and then on Beijing airport, they were interrogated in an isolated office for a night, and requested forcibly to leave from Beijing at once to America.
Okay.
So I don't think it's, and also there are a lot of similar stories that another friend went to Aksu City to visit the elderly mom, but chased by the police for 3 days and spent in detention. And then after the U.S. embassy intervened this issue, and his passport, which was confiscated upon his arrival to Aksu City, and it was returned to him, but he was requested to leave from Aksu. This all happened in 2000, like very early period of the establishment of concentration camp in 2016. So I don't think I will make the decision to return to China with the thought that I will meet with the same situation, and at worst, and I will be forcibly disappear.
Sure. Okay. Wow. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm just going to keep it moving. We're going to try to keep our answers short, just so we can get through as many of these questions as possible. Dr. Mahmoud Hai says, as a urologist, I was performing kidney transplant when I started practice and have signed up for donating my organs, which is registered on my driving license. Is it okay based on Islamic principles? So I'll put that out there.
So I think there's different fiqh councils around the world that have weighed in on this issue, and I tried to summarize a few of them in my slides. And the bottom line is I'm not an imam or an Islamic scholar, so I can't tell you whether or not you should or should not donate your organs. I think most fiqh councils around the world support organ transplantation, and most actually say that it's an act of charity if done for the right intention. But there are conditions, and that's something that I think we all need to read about and learn about. But I think living donor transplant is something that's much less controversial, and most Islamic scholars would support that. With deceased donor transplantation, DCD organs are definitely something that is less controversial than brain dead donors. But bottom line is, I'm registered as an organ donor. My opinion is that it is Islamically permissible and even encouraged based on the different fatwa that I've read. But again, I think everyone needs to do their own research.
Okay. So you're registered as an organ donor. Okay. MashaAllah. How do prisoners of consciousness play into the narrative of national security in China? Does this apply globally, i.e., rising Islamophobia, minorities, etc.?
That's a good question. I think just like any oppressive regime, they're going to have their propaganda machine against a specific population that they're trying to oppress. The same thing that we see with Israel trying to justify their crimes against the Palestinians by blaming Hamas and things like that. There's always going to be propaganda, and for the Uyghurs, from what I've read, they try to paint them as this separatist group that's dangerous to China's national ideology, and they try to collectively paint them a certain way to justify what they're doing, and they call these concentration camps re-education camps, or I don't know what other term that they use, but there's a lot of propaganda out there to justify what they're doing, and I'm sure Sari can speak more about that.
Yeah, I think you addressed the question really well. I don't have much to add to it. So they are labeling Uyghurs as terrorists after the 9/11. They already started their campaign of labeling us as Islamists, separatists, and terrorists. And according to the state propaganda that they released on their newspapers and media, and they view the Islam as a disease. So we are the majority of Uyghurs are sharing the Islamic belief, and then for them, so you're being an Uyghur, and because we are Muslim, and being a Muslim, and being the local people for the region, because they occupied the region in 1949, and also they use the gradual assimilation policy since their occupation. But right now, when it reached to 2016, they realized that their slow assimilation policy into the Han culture and the language eradication policy, they are not working very well. So, in order to carry out their Belt and Road Initiative and stabilize the region altogether, so they would like to eradicate the Uyghurs entirely from the region. So anything that is preventing Uyghurs to disappear or be assimilated into big Han culture is viewed as a threat. For example, their Islamic belief and their Uyghur ethnic identity. That's why they are ending up being in the prison and concentration camps right now.
Okay. We also have one more question. What is the waiting time for renal transplant in Canada?
So when we talk about waiting time, we're talking about deceased donor transplant. So always the number one plan A is you get a living donor transplant from a friend or family member. When we talk about deceased donor waiting lists, it can be anywhere from 3 years for blood group A to anywhere to 6 years for blood group O. So it really depends on someone's blood group and their age and how long they've been on dialysis for. So, but it can be anywhere from 3 to 6 years.
Okay. This is in a different direction. You did something, or if you want to answer this question, you did mention something about reproductive organs. Dr. Mahmoud Hai, what is your opinion about sperm donorship?
So my understanding from an Islamic point of view, it's not permissible because the biologic lineage is something that is very important to be maintained in Islam. So if someone donates reproductive organs or sperm, then the fatherhood of the child that can come from that would not know who their father is. So that's against Islamic principles. So my understanding is that sperm donorship is not allowed.
Okay. We are coming down the stretch here in our last couple questions. Sister Surwi, you work for Justice for All. If there's something we can do, or you have a message to everyone that we should carry, what would it be?
So, one thing, so I really would like to express my gratitude for your organization to work towards raising awareness about how China is harvesting organs from the Uyghurs in the detention facilities, and how China is committing this crime. And really good job that you guys are doing. So, so if you want me to ask just what can we do for the Uyghurs in general, and how can we help Justice for All for your present task, and I say continue the good work that you're doing, and continue to make the Muslim majority countries and its people realize that China is committing a kind of crime which has been unprecedented in human history. And for example, right now, we know that just Palestine issues, that sisters and brothers and who died in Palestine with all those bombardments, and the pain that they are going through, and then the whole world knows, and then and then at least, and we are showing solidarity in here. But right now, like China is a denier of its own genocidal crime, and China is denying that they are harvesting organs and that they are doing sexual abuse and all kind of abuses in the detention centers. But unfortunately, the Muslim country leaders are not showing solidarity for the Uyghurs. So we have to continue our advocacy to make them understand what kind of crime against humanity, what kind of genocide is going on, because locking up 5 million people or more than that, this is like news are featuring like 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. It's not really unanimous, the number. And then some even says 8 million. And I say half of the Uyghurs are locked up, because you look at the ratio. My husband lost one brother into the camp, and I lost 3 into the camp in the beginning of 2016. And right now, the 2 of them were released after my activism, and 1 of them were still staying there. Then, like, you look at the ratio, how big it is from my husband's and my family. We both have family members. And I know a friend who works for Radio Free Asia. Her father, her mother, who were elderly, are locked up, and also 2 brothers were there. So the number is big. So we have to do the work to make the Muslim brothers and sisters understand this is not a Western propaganda. It's an ongoing genocide. It's a crime against humanity. It's really horrific, and we have to show our solidarity. We have to stand on the side of the oppressed, so that when we are asked in hereafter by Allah, and we can answer, oh, I did my part. So my answer is you guys can collaborate with our organization Justice for All, with the all kind of congressional outreach that we have been doing in the Congress to raise awareness. And for example, right now there are 2 bills in progression related to Uyghur. One is forced prevention of forced Uyghur labor, and then this one. Another one is Uyghur human rights. I forgot the bill name. Uyghur human rights. I'm sorry. I know it so clearly. This Uyghur Human Rights Prevention Act, both of them have that keyword Prevention Act. And there are 2 bills. If this number 2 bill is legislated in the Congress, Uyghurs who are fleeing from the Chinese persecution in the entire world, they can get the right of getting the expedited P2 visa. It's really huge for the Uyghurs who are just in exile. So such works should be done in collaboration with your organization. And if you can participate the congressional outreach, because you are reputable and then really authentic academia doctors you guys are, so it can help us tremendously to do such advocacy work both in the Muslim brothers and sisters, and both in USA, to work with the congressmen and women to help the Uyghurs in general. Thank you.
Dr. Ali, Iqbal, do you have any closing thoughts or things we should keep in mind if you just wanted us to get one point to take home to chew on?
No, I want to also thank NIMS for putting this talk, this event together. I think it was really well organized and hopefully informative for everyone. And I think it just all starts with knowledge and just learning about this issue. And especially, as Sirwi mentioned, as medical professionals, it's something that we, especially, forced organ harvesting is just one part of the bigger issue of genocide against the Uyghurs in China. There's the issue of forced labor, in these concentration camps. And as medical professionals, if we focus on the forced organ harvesting aspect of it, then that can be what we can focus on. And when I first kind of got involved in this issue, I was shocked that there weren't a lot of doctors or medical professionals that were involved in forced organ harvesting. It was mainly human rights lawyers and social workers and things like that. So I think if we just need to bring this to awareness to the medical community, and then hopefully from that knowledge we can take action.
Absolutely. Jazakallah. I've started following Sirwi Hussein on Facebook. I don't know if she wants people to, but she has some good updates on there. I know Ali Iqbal you can reach out to him if you have any issues you'd like to discuss transplant issues. You can easily reach him. We will put both of their contact information at the end of this. I wanted to end with this, with 2 points about the personal and the transplant thing. Number one, the spiritual ramifications from taking these organs from people who are alive. This is deep. I don't need a fatwa to know this is disgusting. If you're taking it from somebody who did not consent for their kidney to be transplanted and you're taking it from a fellow Muslim, this is obviously not something we should be a part of as Muslims, as people of conscience. So that's one thing. The second thing is my heart bleeds for the Uyghurs. Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas went all the way to China, was one of the Sahabas of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So I would hope people share some of these links for this ETAC video, just as much as we're sharing for Palestine and Kashmir, whatever issue it is. We must raise our awareness. Our hands are tied in certain things, but we will be held accountable for our actions and our time and what we did with it. So this is an opportunity. You've heard our speakers talk today. Take action, spread the conversation, post it on Facebook, see what you can do, inshallah. And many people are smarter than us on this call who are listening. We need your thoughts and your mind and your ideas at how to bring change and how we can do our best. If not with our hands, at least with our clicks and our talks and our connections with our political representatives. That was my closing thought. I'm going to close with a quick dua. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم أنت السلام منك السلام تبارك يا ذو الجلال والإكرام إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما وسبحان ربك العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Yes, thank you. Assalamu alaikum.